Music can transform you. It can make you fly into the depths of your soul to find yourself and make you discover your originality. The colors that define you uniquely from every other person. It is not a matter of talent, but of authenticity. Just as a butterfly's wings mirror each other, so too can your music resonate to the core, only if it reflects who you really are. This is the path I have been following all my life. And that is why I have created a composition that, in each of its elements, embodies a butterfly, in symmetry of form and harmony, as a symbol of rebirth and inner and musical discovery. In the previous episode, my composition ended with a hand gesture reminiscent of a butterfly's flight. This shape of the fingers on the piano is based on bilateral symmetry, the same symmetry we share with most living creatures, and from which what I called butterfly chords were born. In fact, in the first episode I had introduced the sigma chord, a 5-note chord that contains all possible intervals except one, the tritone. And I had chosen to call it zygote, because it contains the maximum amount of musical information in the smallest number of notes, just as a zygote cell contains in its DNA the potential of a whole life. Now, to compose the beginning of this new piece, I used a sigma chord for each wing of the butterfly. Breaking it down, however, into 2 smaller chords. These chords are the only ones that encompass all the possible distances between the 7 notes of a natural scale, and consist of 4 notes. So I decided to call them epsilon chords, because the epsilon Lyra star system consists of 4 stars rotating in balance with each other. This new segment of my musical composition is built entirely with this type of chords, of which I explored the 4 natural versions and their symmetrical reflections. For the rhythm, I chose to construct an arpeggio in 5/4 time, inspired by the 5 notes of the sigma chord, from which everything originated in the previous episode. Unfortunately, however, I'm not a good pianist, and so I had to play first the right hand and then the left hand, by recording them separately. And since I'm also not a drummer, I involved my friend Matteo Zordani, who showed his talent by playing fluidly and creatively and taking a fantastic solo in the middle part. But there was still one not insignificant detail to be resolved. How was I going to turn an entire piece of music into a butterfly? First, I thought of overdubbing the various instruments following the shape of a butterfly. But I wanted the musical content to be mirrored as well, so that the second half of the piece would be the inverted image of the first, like the wings of a butterfly. And so I did. In particular, the electric guitar solo in the second half is the same as in the first half, but played in reverse. And the same goes for the bass, double bass, and the opening and ending theme, which are mirrored, although in this case I did not reverse the audio, but played from beginning to end. I also did a curious experiment. I reversed the second half again to see if playing it backwards it would sound like the first part. And indeed, in addition to the solo going back in the original direction, the rest of the music also took on a similar shape, though somewhat transfigured. So everything was perfectly mirrored? Not quite. In fact, I decided that one element should continue in a linear way and not reflect backwards, for a specific reason. I am referring to the butterfly chords, which are doubled by the 12-string guitar and the classical guitar. They too are repeated in a mirror image fashion in the second half. But I did not want to reverse the order of the notes in the arpeggio in each individual bar as well. This is because the butterfly is a symbol of transformation, intended not as a simple reversal of the past, but as a real transition to a new condition. Often this transformation occurs during the cycle of a life. So I divided the composition into 7 parts, each representing a phase of existence. From the initial birth, one goes through childhood, a bright and sunny phase. Then one enters adulthood, marked by the search for meaning, for a why, for a place in the world. A time that can be complex, even dark or dramatic, but always accompanied by a growing harmony that leads to a central point of revelation, like an explosion of energy, light, and truth. After this revelation, one relives the previous stages, but with a new awareness. Nothing changes from the past, but everything is reread with a new meaning. And in the end, one returns to that initial childlike phase, charged, however, with the lived experience. The melody is just the same, but it is reversed, and this part represents the fullness that precedes the final fulfillment. That is, the fulfillment of a person's destiny, the fruit of his life. The piece is thus a metaphor for the cycle of life: birth, childhood, adulthood, revelation, meaning, and fulfillment. At the end, then, I couldn't resist. I included some numerical symbols. To reinforce the idea of symmetry, I made sure that the central bar, the mirror bar, so to speak, was number 77, which, however, I would prefer to write this way because it looks more like a butterfly. Also, the total duration of the piece is 5 minutes and 25 seconds, which, when written in square characters, takes the form of two opposing and identical butterflies, one embedded in the other, somewhat like the very form of the piece, and somewhat also due to the fact that I am 52 years old right now. And so it is, so to speak, a kind of self-portrait. Actually, a somewhat mimetic portrait, because just like a butterfly that blends in with its environment, music can hide and reappear without us noticing. I'll explain how. Butterflies are masters in the art of mimicry. For example, many butterflies display patterns that mimic the eyes of larger animals so as to scare off predators when they open their wings. And just as a butterfly can fool predators with an optical illusion, people too sometimes hide their vulnerabilities behind masks. But I believe that beyond this camouflage lies a deep desire for authenticity, an impulse to show one's true colors when the moment is right. And so, butterflies teach me that beauty lies not only in the ability to camouflage, but also in the confidence to spread our wings and reveal our splendor. So in some ways, human life is also similar to butterflies dancing between visibility and invisibility. A dance between emerging in one's authenticity and merging with the social context. Just like a butterfly, each of us possesses a unique combination of traits, talents, and imperfections that makes us unmistakable, even when life sometimes requires us to blend into the crowd. To symbolize this camouflage, I varied the volume of the piano and guitar accompaniment, so that one continuously blended into the other, just like a butterfly blending into its surroundings. And then I inserted some clocks, a little bit of musical ticking. I wanted to symbolize the flow of time and the short life of the butterfly with these series of continuous and evenly spaced notes. Even the hourglass, which measures the flow of time, has the shape of a butterfly in which the future is on one wing while the past is on the other. And my composition has exactly this shape, where the present, the only time we are given to live, is at the central point, the one where I've placed an explosion of truth and revelation. Truth. At that point, I asked myself how I could translate the search for truth into musical notes. First, I decided to name this butterfly Ku, after the term used by the ancient Sumerians to define what is authentic. By coincidence, the cuneiform character they used more than 5,000 years ago, the first symbol mankind drew to express the concept of truth, has a shape reminiscent of a butterfly. And perhaps truth is more accessible through symbol or metaphor than through a statement that claims to be objective and realistic. Personally, I feel much more truth in the taste of a fruit and the gratitude I feel while eating it than in the knowledge of its molecular structure or the analysis of its chemical components. I feel more truth in feeling the embrace of water while swimming than in calculating its infinite whirls. Or perhaps truth is nothing more than the fusion of these two opposite dimensions. Just as in the dilemma of the famous Chinese philosopher Chuang Tzu, who 2,400 years ago wondered whether we are real or whether we are just the dream of a butterfly. A question that merges objective reality with metaphorical dreaming. It is to represent this search for truth that I thought of improvising the guitar solo on chords that follow an ascending chromatic scale. A scale that encompasses all 12 notes of an octave and ends rather dramatically before opening up to the middle part, based instead on the brighter scale, the Lydian scale, which I mentioned in the last episode. For this middle part, I wanted an explosion of energy and light, which is why Matteo improvised his drum solo here. And speaking about hidden truths, in this piece I hid another much more famous musical composition, although I completely turned its meaning upside down. Just as the life cycle of a caterpillar ends in a colorful flight, the same happens to some stars, such as M29, a red giant that, having exhausted its fuel, has allowed strong stellar winds to disperse its material to form a stunning butterfly wings nebula. A rather short stage, since it lasts only a few thousand years, just as the life of a butterfly on Earth lasts only a couple of weeks. As the Indian poet Tagore wrote, "The butterfly counts not months but moments, and has time enough." And so I imagine that nebulae also count instants, like blinks that last for centuries. All this reminded me that beauty and color can emerge precisely in the final moments of life, as in autumn leaves. And so, I wanted to insert the opening and closing phrases of the song Autumn Leaves, first in the bass, and later in the final notes of the guitar solo. I did this to overturn the idea of autumn as an inescapable conclusion, to turn it into a potential gateway to color and revelation. The color that is also found at the other end of life, in children's pencils and toys, and in their puns like the bread and butterfly, encountered by Alice through the looking glass. A creature with wings made of buttered bread slices, a head of sugar cubes and a body of bread crust. Few butterflies have such an ephemeral life. I too invented a special butterfly because even the dissonance of musical intervals, a mathematical curve, can flap its wings just like a butterfly. In fact, in the middle part, I have included a special musical object that I derived from a famous scientific experiment from the 1960s. That experiment measures the dissonance we perceive when listening to two musical notes, starting from two identical sounds and going up to the distance of an octave. However, since two notes an octave apart are perceived as being equal, I thought of transforming that curve by averaging between the equivalent distances, what musicians call interval inversion, and arrange them on a polar graph. The result was this butterfly of dissonance to which I made its wings flap by playing all 12 notes except the tritone, because of the fact that, as I explained in the previous episode, it represents our humanity, the union of opposites, like sky and earth, and because I believe that we catch only distant glimmers of this central revelation. We are outsiders to it, and we do not fully understand it. Finally, I rescued the kalimba's wings from this lizard that wanted to eat it. And I'm really very pleased with the end result. It's a composition I'm proud of, and I hope you will like it too. Meet Ku. This track joins the previous Sky, Earth and Life and is available on various music platforms. In the next episode, I will add a new segment to continue this incremental musical composition. For this, I suggest you access the playlist I made on Spotify, The Game of Music, and turn on playback without pauses, reducing the initial fade into 1/10 of a second. Then you can enjoy it in an uninterrupted stream. As always, you can download all the audio material, images, scores, diagrams and more from the link I leave here in the description. I'm very happy to share all my discoveries with you, but don't forget that all this is just a game of free associations of ideas and analogies in which I have chosen music as the main way of connection. My purpose is not to teach something or to derive some benefit. What I uniquely desire is to spread hope through beauty. And I hope I succeeded, if only for a few minutes. Maybe in the coming days, observing a butterfly, you can get back thinking about all galaxies, life cycles, dissonant wings or social mimicry, who knows. Perhaps the most valuable lesson I learned from butterflies, however, was the most unexpected. I never thought that their color actually depended on us. In fact, many of them owe their shimmering colors not to pigments, but to a phenomenon known as structural color. That is, to the way light interacts with the structure of the tiny scales on their wings. Their basic color thus changes depending on the direction of the light and the angle at which we view them. The same way it happens when we see a rainbow on soap bubbles, even though they are completely transparent. Similarly, our perception of life can also change depending on the perspective from which we view it. What seems dark or difficult from one point of view may appear bright and full of possibilities from another. And now, every time I see one of these little creatures, I feel its call to open myself up, to change my angle of vision, to embrace new insights and colors, and to see beauty and possibility even in difficult situations, hoping for a good ray of light. So how will I move forward? How will my composition develop at this point? In the finale, the piece suddenly stops, and my impression is that in this story that is being created on this imaginary island that I call Solaria, and whose map I invented, from the fall of the meteorite that I mentioned in the first episode to the birth of Ku, the next step will probably be the encounter with the wind and the rain. I think this butterfly will have to protect itself, and will be surprised by coming into contact with division, incommunicability, fear and war. If you want to follow its flight, you are welcome. But don't forget, every other person shares something unique with you, a color that defines them, an original side of them. You can transform music.